In the shadow of Greystone Manor, where golden fields meet cobblestone paths, a child's cruel words would shatter one woman's heart, until truth revealed the most precious treasure of all. The morning mist clung to the cobblestone path like whispered secrets, swirling around Adelaide Whitmore's worn leather boots as she made her way through the village of Thornfield. Her calloused hands gripped the wooden handle of her wicker basket, filled with fresh herbs from her modest garden behind Willowbrook Cottage. The scent of lavender and rosemary mingled with the crisp autumn air, carrying promises of the harvest season that painted the surrounding fields in shades of amber and gold. Adelaide's simple brown dress, mended countless times with careful stitches, rustled softly as she walked. Her auburn hair was neatly braided and tucked beneath a faded blue headscarf, a remnant from better days. Though few in Thornfield knew of the life she had left behind. The fabric had once been silk, imported from distant lands, but time and sorrow had worn it thin, much like the woman who wore it. The village square bustled with the familiar rhythm of morning commerce. Merchants called out their wares from beneath colourful awnings, their voices mixing with the clip-clop of horse hooves on ancient stones. The air was thick with the aroma of fresh bread from Baker Morrison's shop, and the earthy scent of vegetables still damp with morning dew. Adelaide moved through the crowd like a shadow, her presence acknowledged with polite nods but little warmth. She had learned to accept her place in the invisible margins of Thornfield society. As she approached the fountain at the village centre, where carved angels seemed to weep crystalline tears into the basin below, the thunderous sound of approaching hooves made her step aside. A magnificent black carriage, adorned with the golden crest of the Ashford family, rolled to a stop near the fountain. The brass fittings gleamed like captured sunlight, and the mahogany wood was polished to mirror perfection. From within the carriage emerged a boy of perhaps 10 summers, his golden hair catching the light like spun wheat. Young Nathaniel Ashford stepped down with the practiced grace of nobility, his navy blue velvet coat perfectly tailored to his small frame. His boots, made of the finest leather, had never known the touch of honest dirt. Behind him followed Mrs. Cordelia Ashford, her emerald silk dress rustling with every calculated movement, and the imposing figure of Lord Edmund Ashford, whose presence commanded attention even in silence. Adelaide instinctively lowered her gaze, as was expected of someone of her station. She had learned long ago that direct eye contact with the aristocracy was considered presumptuous, even offensive. The basket in her hands suddenly felt heavier, and she became acutely aware of the patches on her dress, the calluses on her palms, the humble simplicity that marked her as distinctly different from the family before her. Young Nathaniel's bright blue eyes swept across the village square with the casual indifference of inherited privilege. His gaze lingered momentarily on the various villagers, the blacksmith's children playing near the well, the flower vendor arranging her colourful display, the elderly parson reading his morning prayers on the chapel steps. When his eyes finally settled on Adelaide, something shifted in his expression. The boy approached her with confident strides, his head held high in a manner that spoke of generations of noble breeding. Adelaide felt her breath catch in her throat as he drew near, close enough that she could see the fine embroidery on his coat and smell the expensive cologne that clung to his clothes like an invisible crown. "You there," Nathaniel said, his voice carrying the crisp articulation of private tutors and classical education. "What brings you to our village square this morning?" Adelaide's heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird. She had expected to remain invisible, as she always did. The direct attention felt like standing naked beneath the scorching sun. Her voice, when it finally came, was barely above a whisper. "Merely conducting my business, young master. I mean no disturbance." Nathaniel studied her with the calculating gaze of someone far older than his years. His eyes took in every detail: her mended dress, her work-worn hands, the humble basket that contained her modest offerings. A slow, uncomfortable smile spread across his cherubic features. Business? He repeated, the word dripping with barely concealed disdain. What manner of business could someone like you possibly have that would concern people like us? The words hit Adelaide like physical blows, each syllable cutting deeper than the last. She had endured countless moments of subtle dismissal, quiet rejection, and polite indifference, but this child's cruel directness was somehow more painful than all the adult cruelties combined. The innocence in his face made his words all the more devastating. Mrs. Cordelia Ashford approached with measured steps, her fan fluttering like the wings of an exotic bird. Her smile was practiced, polished, and completely devoid of warmth. "Nathaniel, darling, we mustn't linger among the common folk. We have appointments to keep." The boy nodded dutifully, but continued to stare at Adelaide with an expression that mixed curiosity with repulsion. "Mother," he said, his voice carrying across the square with the clarity of a bell, "why do we allow such poor people in our village? They make everything look so terribly shabby." The words fell into the morning air like stones into still water, creating ripples of shocked silence that spread throughout the square. Merchants paused mid-sentence. Children stopped their games. Even the horses seemed to sense the tension that suddenly thickened the atmosphere. Adelaide felt the blood drain from her face, leaving her skin pale as parchment. Her knees threatened to buckle beneath the weight of the humiliation, but years of hidden strength kept her upright. She clutched her basket tighter, her knuckles white with the effort of maintaining her composure. Young Nathaniel took another step closer, his innocent cruelty reaching its peak. "I should never want a mother who dressed in rags," he declared with the absolute certainty that only children possess. "I should never want a mother who was poor and common and ordinary." The final word hung in the air like a death sentence. Adelaide felt something break inside her chest. Not her heart, for that had been broken long ago, but the last fragile thread of hope she had carefully guarded. She looked into the boy's beautiful, cruel face and saw nothing of herself reflected there, nothing of the love she had carried like a secret flame for so many years. Without a word, Adelaide turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing against the cobblestones like a funeral march. Behind her, she heard young Nathaniel's laughter mixing with his mother's approving murmur, and the sound followed her all the way home to Willowbrook Cottage, where she would spend the rest of the day weeping into the herbs that would never again smell like hope. The wooden door of Willowbrook Cottage creaked on its rusted hinges as Adelaide stepped across the threshold, her basket falling forgotten to the floor. Dried lavender scattered across the worn planks like tears made visible, their purple petals crushed beneath her trembling feet. The small room that served as both kitchen and parlour felt suffocating, its low ceiling pressing down like the weight of unspoken truths. Adelaide sank into the single wooden chair beside her modest table, her body folding inward like a flower closing against the cold. The morning's humiliation replayed in her mind with merciless clarity. Nathaniel's beautiful face twisted with disgust, his words cutting through her heart like shards of broken glass. "I should never want a mother who was poor and common and ordinary." If only he knew. If only he could understand the price she had paid for his comfort, the sacrifice that had been dressed in noble words but felt like nothing more than abandonment. The cottage around her bore witness to her solitude. A single bed in the corner, draped with quilts she had sewn by candlelight during endless winter evenings. Shelves lined with herbs and remedies that provided her meagre living, chamomile for sleepless nights, willow bark for aching bones, feverfew for the headaches that plagued the village women. Everything was clean, orderly, and heartbreakingly simple. But hidden beneath a loose floorboard near the hearth lay Adelaide's most precious possession, a small wooden box containing the only evidence of the life she had surrendered. With hands that shook like autumn leaves, she pried up the board and retrieved the box, its surface smooth from countless careful caresses. Inside, wrapped in faded silk that matched her headscarf, lay a miniature portrait painted on ivory. The image showed a younger Adelaide, her auburn hair elaborately styled, her neck adorned with pearls that caught the light like captured stars. But it was not her own image that drew her trembling fingers. It was the tiny bundle in her arms, a baby with golden hair and eyes the color of summer sky. "My sweet Nathaniel," she whispered to the portrait, her voice breaking like waves against stone. "My beautiful boy." The memory crashed over her with the force of a winter storm, carrying her back to that terrible night over 10 years past. She had been Lady Adelaide Whitmore then, wife to the late Lord Jonathan Whitmore, mistress of Rosemere Estate. Their marriage had been arranged, but had blossomed into genuine affection, and when Nathaniel was born, their joy seemed complete. But Jonathan's death from fever, when Nathaniel was barely walking, had changed everything. The estate, heavily mortgaged and burdened with debts that Jonathan had hidden from her, crumbled like a house of cards. The creditors circled like vultures, demanding payment that simply did not exist. Adelaide had faced a choice that no mother should ever have to make. Lord Edmund Ashford, Jonathan's distant cousin and a man of considerable wealth, had made his offer with the cold calculation of a business transaction. He would assume the debts, save what remained of the Whitmore name, and provide Nathaniel with every advantage that nobility could offer: education, position, security, a future bright with promise. In return, Adelaide would relinquish all claim to her son, disappear from society, and never speak of their connection. "Think of the boy's future," Lord Edmund had said, his voice devoid of emotion as he outlined the terms. "Would you condemn him to poverty for the sake of your maternal feelings? Would you see him grow up in shame, the son of a disgraced widow with nothing to offer but love? Love. As if love were worthless, as if the bond between mother and child were merely sentiment to be discarded when inconvenient. But Adelaide, desperate and broken, had seen the truth in his words. She could offer Nathaniel nothing but affection, while the Ashfords could give him everything, everything except the one thing that money could not buy. A sharp knock at her door pulled Adelaide from the depths of memory. She quickly replaced the portrait in its box and returned it to its hiding place, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. When she opened the door, she found Martha Cunningham, the village seamstress, standing on her threshold with concern etched across her weathered features. "Adelaide, child," Martha said, stepping inside without invitation. "Half the village saw what happened this morning. That boy's words were cruel beyond measure." Martha had been Adelaide's only confidant, the sole person in Thornfield who knew fragments of her true story. The older woman had taken Adelaide under her wing when she first arrived, asking no questions but offering the quiet support that had kept Adelaide from drowning in despair. "He has grown into everything I feared he would become," Adelaide said, her voice hollow as an empty well. "Proud, thoughtless, cruel to those he sees as beneath him. Perhaps Lord Edmund was right. Perhaps a poor mother would have ruined him entirely." Martha's eyes flashed with indignation. "Nonsense, child. That boy has been spoiled and taught that wealth makes him superior to honest folk. But cruelty is not bred in the bone. It is learned, and what is learned can be unlearned, given the right teacher." Adelaide shook her head, fresh tears threatening to spill. "He looks at me and sees only what I appear to be. A common woman unworthy of his notice. He has no idea that I once held him when he cried, sang him lullabies until he slept, counted every tiny finger and toe as though they were precious jewels." "Then perhaps," Martha said quietly, settling into the chair beside Adelaide, "it is time he learned that worth cannot be measured in gold coins or fine clothes. Perhaps this boy needs to discover what true poverty really means, and what true wealth looks like." As if summoned by Martha's words, another knock echoed through the cottage. This time it was young Timothy Fletcher, the blacksmith's apprentice, his face flushed with excitement and worry. "Miss Adelaide," he gasped, still catching his breath from running, "there's been an accident on the road to Greystone Manor. Lord Edmund's carriage has overturned in the ditch, and the family is stranded. The boy is hurt. Nothing serious, they say, but he's shaken badly. Mrs. Ashford is demanding a physician, but Doc Henley is away delivering Mrs. Cooper's baby. They're asking if anyone knows of herbal remedies for shock and minor injuries. Adelaide's hands moved instinctively toward her healing herbs, maternal instinct overriding years of careful distance. Martha caught her wrist gently, understanding passing between them like a current. "Perhaps," Martha said with a meaningful look, "this is Providence offering you a chance to show that poor woman what real worth looks like." The path to the accident site wound through the golden countryside like a ribbon of uncertainty, each step carrying Adelaide deeper into a confrontation she had both dreaded and longed for across 10 years of silence. Her leather satchel, filled with carefully prepared remedies, bounced against her hip as she hurried alongside Timothy Fletcher, whose young legs struggled to match her determined pace. Martha had insisted on accompanying her, understanding the emotional minefield that lay ahead. "You cannot face this alone, child," the older woman had declared, wrapping her own woolen shawl around her shoulders. "Whatever happens, you will not stand unprotected." The autumn air carried the scent of wood smoke and dying leaves, mingling with the distant sound of raised voices and restless horses. As they crested the small hill overlooking Thornfield Bridge, the scene of chaos spread before them like a tableau of disaster. The magnificent Ashford carriage lay on its side in the shallow ditch, one wheel spinning lazily in the afternoon light. Expensive luggage was scattered across the road like broken dreams, and the horses, still in their traces, snorted nervously while the coachman attempted to calm them. Lord Edmund Ashford stood beside the overturned vehicle, his usually immaculate appearance dishevelled and his face darkened with frustration. His fine coat was torn at the shoulder, and mud stained his polished boots. Mrs. Cordelia Ashford sat on a fallen log nearby, fanning herself dramatically while issuing a steady stream of complaints to anyone within hearing distance. But it was the sight of Nathaniel that made Adelaide's breath catch in her throat like a trapped bird. The boy sat on a moss-covered boulder, his usually perfect golden hair tousled and streaked with dirt. His navy coat was torn at the elbow, revealing a scrape that had bled through the white linen beneath. More concerning was the glazed expression in his bright blue eyes, the telltale sign of shock that Adelaide had learned to recognize during her years of healing work. "Finally!" Mrs. Ashford exclaimed as she spotted the approaching group. "Timothy said someone might know of remedies, though I hardly see how village folk could be of assistance in a matter requiring proper medical attention." Lord Edmund's gaze fixed on Adelaide with poorly concealed disdain. "You are the herb woman, I presume. I suppose you shall have to suffice until we can summon a real physician from the county seat." Adelaide felt the familiar sting of dismissal, but her maternal instincts overrode her wounded pride. She moved directly toward Nathaniel, her trained eye assessing his condition with the skill born of necessity. The boy looked up as she approached, his usually bright gaze unfocused and uncertain. "Young master," Adelaide said softly, kneeling beside his makeshift seat, "I am here to help. May I examine your injuries?" Nathaniel blinked slowly, as if trying to bring her face into focus. The cruel confidence from their morning encounter had evaporated, leaving behind a frightened child who hurt and confused. I remember you," he said uncertainly, "from the village square, but you look different somehow." Adelaide's heart clenched at the vulnerability in his voice. Gone was the imperious boy who had declared his disdain for poor mothers. In his place sat a lost child who needed comfort, the same child she had once rocked to sleep in her arms. "Sometimes people look different when we truly see them," she replied gently, opening her satchel. She withdrew a small vial of willowbark tincture and a clean cloth dampened with chamomile water. "This may sting a little," she warned, carefully cleaning the scrape on his arm. Nathaniel winced but did not pull away, his eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made Adelaide's hands tremble. "You have kind eyes," he said suddenly, his voice small and wondering. "They remind me of someone, but I cannot remember who." The words struck Adelaide like lightning, and she had to pause in her ministrations to steady herself. Martha, who had positioned herself nearby, reached out to squeeze Adelaide's shoulder in silent support. "Perhaps," Adelaide managed, her voice barely above a whisper, "they remind you of someone who loved you very much." As she worked applying a healing salve made from comfrey and calendula, Adelaide found herself studying every detail of Nathaniel's face. He had grown so much, yet she could still see traces of the baby she had known. The way his eyebrows drew together when he was puzzled, the small dimple that appeared in his left cheek when he almost smiled. "Why are you being so gentle with me?" Nathaniel asked, genuine confusion coloring his words. "This morning I said terrible things to you. I was cruel." Adelaide's hands stilled for a moment before resuming their careful work. "Because, young master, when someone is hurt, we help them. It matters not what words were spoken in anger or ignorance. What matters is the pain that needs healing." Mrs. Cordelia Ashford's sharp voice cut through the moment like a blade. "Nathaniel, surely you are not engaging in conversation with the help. It is most unseemly." But Nathaniel ignored his adoptive mother, his gaze remaining fixed on Adelaide's face. "I do not understand," he said quietly. "Why would you help someone who hurt your feelings? Why would you care about a stranger's pain?" "Because," Adelaide replied, wrapping a clean bandage around his arm with practiced skill, "love does not count the cost. True compassion asks nothing in return. It simply is, like sunlight or rain or the beating of one's heart." Lord Edmund strode over, his patience clearly exhausted. "That will be quite enough philosophical discussion," he declared curtly. "The boy's injuries appear minor. What we require now is practical assistance in righting the carriage and returning to Greystone Manor." But as Adelaide began to pack away her supplies, Nathaniel's small hand suddenly grasped her wrist. His touch was gentle but urgent, and when she looked into his eyes, she saw something that made her heart race. A flicker of recognition, deep and instinctual, like a half-remembered dream struggling to surface. "Please," he whispered, so quietly that only she could hear. "Please do not leave yet. I feel safer when you are near." The admission hung in the air between them, fragile as spun glass. Adelaide felt tears threaten to spill, but she blinked them back, aware that Mrs. Ashford was watching their interaction with growing suspicion. "I shall remain until you are safely on your way," Adelaide promised, her voice steady despite the storm raging in her heart. As the afternoon shadows lengthened and the men worked to right the carriage, Adelaide stayed close to Nathaniel, offering him sips of chamomile tea to calm his nerves and speaking to him in the soft, soothing tones that had once lulled him to sleep. And with each passing moment, she saw something beautiful and terrible unfolding. Her son, the child she had sacrificed everything to save, was beginning to see past the barriers of class and prejudice to glimpse the woman who had never stopped loving him. The evening shadows had begun to stretch across the countryside like grasping fingers when the carriage was finally righted and deemed roadworthy. Adelaide had remained at Nathaniel's side throughout the ordeal, her presence offering a comfort that the boy seemed reluctant to abandon. As the coachman made his final inspections and Lord Edmund barked orders about securing the luggage, Mrs. Cordelia Ashford's patience had worn thin as morning frost. "Enough of this unseemly attachment," she declared, her voice sharp as broken glass. "Nathaniel, we are departing immediately. Thank the woman for her services and be done with it." But Nathaniel made no move to obey. Instead, he turned to Adelaide with an expression of desperate confusion, as if she held the answers to questions he did not yet know how to ask. "I do not wish to leave," he said quietly. "I feel as though I belong here, with you." The words struck Adelaide like physical blows, each syllable carrying the weight of 10 years of suppressed longing. She saw Martha's warning glance, felt the dangerous territory they were entering, but found herself powerless to step back from the precipice. "Young master," Adelaide began carefully. "You belong with your family, in your grand home, with all the comforts befitting your station." "But what if that is not where I truly belong?" Nathaniel asked, his voice carrying a wisdom that seemed far beyond his years. "What if comfort and station matter less than this feeling I have when I look at you?" Mrs. Cordelia Ashford swept forward like an avenging angel, her emerald silk dress rustling with indignation. "Nathaniel Edmund Ashford, you will cease this nonsense immediately. A boy of your breeding does not form attachments to common villagers." "She is not common," Nathaniel protested, surprising everyone with the fierce intensity of his defense. "She has the gentlest hands and the kindest heart, and when she speaks to me, I feel as though I have been waiting my whole life to hear her voice." Lord Edmund, who had been supervising the loading of their belongings, turned sharply at his son's outburst. His eyes moved between Nathaniel and Adelaide with a calculation that made Adelaide's blood run cold. She recognized that look, the same cold assessment he had made on the night he had offered to take her son away. "What manner of spell have you cast over my boy?" Lord Edmund demanded, advancing on Adelaide with barely restrained fury. "What witchcraft have you employed to turn his mind against his own family?" Adelaide stepped back, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "I have done nothing, my lord, save tend to his injuries with the knowledge God granted me." "Lies!" Mrs. Ashford shrieked, her composure finally cracking like a delicate vase. "No simple herb woman could inspire such unnatural devotion. There is something sinister at work here, some connection that threatens everything we have built." The word connection hung in the air like a thunderclap. Adelaide felt the earth shifting beneath her feet as Lord Edmund's eyes narrowed with sudden, terrible understanding. "Connection," he repeated slowly, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "Yes, I begin to see. There is indeed a connection here, one that should have remained buried forever." Nathaniel looked between the adults with growing alarm, sensing the undercurrents of a battle he could not comprehend. "What connection? What are you speaking of?" Lord Edmund's smile was cold as winter moonlight. "Tell him, Adelaide Whitmore. Or should I say, Lady Adelaide Whitmore. Tell the boy exactly what connection you share." The name struck the assembled group like lightning. Martha gasped, stepping closer to Adelaide in protective solidarity. Timothy Fletcher's eyes widened with shocked recognition. But it was Nathaniel's reaction that shattered Adelaide's heart. The complete bewilderment that crossed his beautiful features, followed by a dawning horror as pieces of a puzzle he had never known existed began to fall into place. "Lady Adelaide?" Nathaniel whispered, his voice barely audible above the evening wind. "But that was my mother's name. My real mother, who died when I was very small." "No, she did not die," Lord Edmund said with cruel satisfaction. "She simply proved too weak to provide for you, too poor to give you the life you deserved. So she sold you to us like a prized colt, signed away all rights to call herself your mother in exchange for our promise to raise you as our own." "Edmund, stop!" Mrs. Ashford hissed, but her husband was beyond restraint. "This woman," he continued, pointing an accusing finger at Adelaide, "is the creature who abandoned you in infancy, the selfish wretch who chose her own comfort over her child's welfare." Adelaide felt the world tilt beneath her feet as Nathaniel's face transformed from confusion to betrayal to a pain so deep it seemed to reach into her very soul. The boy she had sacrificed everything to save was looking at her as though she were a stranger, worse, as though she were the villain of his story. "Is it true?" Nathaniel asked, his voice breaking like a reed in a storm. Are you the mother who left me?" Adelaide's voice failed her completely. How could she explain the impossible choice she had faced? How could she make him understand that giving him away had been the greatest act of love she had ever performed? The words caught in her throat like thorns, leaving her mute and defenseless. "I see the truth in your silence," Nathaniel said, tears beginning to stream down his dirt-stained cheeks. You are the one who abandoned me. And this morning, when I said I would never want a poor mother, I was speaking of you without knowing it. The irony was so cruel, so perfectly devastating, that Adelaide nearly collapsed beneath its weight. Her son, her beloved, precious son, had unknowingly rejected her with his own words, and now that he knew the truth, that rejection had become intentional and complete. "Nathaniel," Adelaide finally managed, her voice raw with unshed tears. "You do not understand the circumstances." "I understand enough," he cried, backing away from her as though she carried plague. "I understand that you gave me away. I understand that everything I said this morning was true. I do not want a poor mother who abandons her children." The words hit Adelaide like physical blows, driving her to her knees on the muddy road. Martha rushed to her side, but Adelaide barely felt her friend's supporting arms. All she could see was Nathaniel's face, beautiful and terrible in its childish judgment, condemning her for a choice that had torn her soul in half. Lord Edmund moved to place a protective arm around Nathaniel's shoulders, his victory complete. "Come, my boy. We have lingered too long in this place of unpleasant revelations. Let us return home and forget this unfortunate encounter." As they walked toward the carriage, Nathaniel turned back once to look at Adelaide, kneeling broken in the dirt. Their eyes met across the growing distance, and for one terrible moment she saw not anger, but profound loss, as though he too understood that something precious had been shattered beyond repair. The fever came upon Nathaniel like a summer storm, swift, merciless, and consuming. For 3 days he lay in the grand four-poster bed at Greystone Manor, his golden hair damp with perspiration, his blue eyes bright with delirium. Dr. Pemberton, summoned from the county seat, had pronounced his condition grave, but offered little beyond bleeding and bitter tonics that seemed to worsen rather than heal. Mrs. Cordelia Ashford paced the marble floors of the manor like a caged bird, her usual composure shattered by helplessness. Lord Edmund stood vigil by the window, his commanding presence reduced to that of a powerless father, watching his child slip away. The house, normally alive with the bustle of servants and the rhythm of daily life, had fallen into a hushed, desperate quiet. It was Martha Cunningham who finally broke through their pride, arriving at the manor's grand entrance with mud on her boots and determination in her weathered eyes. She pushed past the startled butler and marched directly into the morning room where the Ashfords sat in miserable silence. "Your boy is dying," she announced without preamble, her voice cutting through their pretense like a blade through silk. "And your fancy doctor with his leeches and his Latin words cannot save him, but I know someone who can." Lord Edmund's face flushed with indignation. "How dare you intrude upon our private—" "Adelaide Whitmore saved half this village from the fever that took 20 souls last winter," Martha interrupted, her eyes blazing with righteous fury. "She has knowledge in her hands that your educated fool lacks. But more than that, she has something your boy needs more than medicine." Mrs. Ashford looked up from her sodden handkerchief, hope and desperation warring in her expression. "What could that wretched woman possibly offer that we cannot provide?" "Love," Martha replied simply. "The love of a mother who never stopped caring, never stopped watching from afar, never stopped praying for his welfare. That boy's spirit is as sick as his body, poisoned by lies and half-truths. He needs healing that can only come from understanding the truth." The truth. The word hung in the air like a challenge, demanding acknowledgement of the deception that had shaped Nathaniel's entire existence. Lord Edmund's jaw worked as though chewing bitter medicine, while Mrs. Ashford pressed her handkerchief to her lips to stifle a sob. "Tell them, Martha," came a voice from the doorway. Adelaide stood there, her simple brown dress a stark contrast to the opulent surroundings, but her presence filled the room with quiet strength. "Tell them what they refuse to remember." Martha nodded grimly. Adelaide Whitmore didn't abandon her son for comfort or convenience. She sold everything she owned, her jewels, her furniture, her very wedding ring, trying to save the estate and keep him with her. When there was nothing left, when the creditors were demanding payment that would have seen them both in debtor's prison, She made the hardest choice any mother could make. Adelaide stepped further into the room, her voice steady despite the tears that threatened. I gave him to you not because I did not want him, but because I loved him too much to see him suffer for my failures. Every night for 10 years, I have wondered if I made the right choice. Every day I have watched him from afar, seeing him grow strong and educated and proud, telling myself that his happiness justified my pain. But you took money, Mrs. Ashford whispered, her voice barely audible. Edmund said you took payment for... I took nothing, Adelaide said firmly. Lord Edmund offered payment to ease his conscience, but I refused. The only thing I asked was that Nathaniel be told I had died, so he would never feel abandoned. I thought it kinder that he believe himself an orphan than know his mother chose others to raise him. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of ragged breathing from the sick room above. Dr. Pemberton appeared in the doorway, his face grave and his hands stained with his patient's blood. I have done all I can, he announced solemnly. The fever shows no sign of breaking. If there is a priest you wish to summon... No. The word came from Lord Edmund, spoken with surprising force. He looked at Adelaide with eyes that held both pain and recognition. There will be no priest, not yet. He paused, the weight of years settling on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. Go to him, Adelaide. If anyone can call him back from the darkness, it should be his mother. Adelaide needed no further permission. She climbed the grand staircase that she had once descended as Lady Adelaide Whitmore, but now ascended as something far more precious, a mother returning to her child. The sick room was dim and close, heavy with the scent of fever and fear. Nathaniel lay motionless, save for the shallow rise and fall of his chest, his face pale as carved ivory. Adelaide settled beside his bed, her calloused hands gentle as butterfly wings as she touched his burning forehead. "My darling boy," she whispered, her voice breaking with love too long suppressed. "My precious son, I am here." For hours she sat with him, bathing his fevered skin with cool cloths, administering tinctures that she had prepared through sleepless nights of worry. But more than medicine, she gave him something no doctor could prescribe. She sang to him. The same lullabies she had crooned when he was a baby, the melodies that had once been his whole world. Somewhere in the depths of fever dreams, Nathaniel heard that voice. It called to him across the void of sickness and confusion, a beacon of warmth in the cold darkness. Slowly, like dawn breaking over a winter landscape, his eyes fluttered open to find Adelaide's face hovering above him, transformed by love into something almost ethereal. "Mother," he whispered, the word carrying the weight of recognition that came not from memory but from something deeper, a knowledge written in the very cells of his being. Adelaide's tears fell like gentle rain upon his face. "Yes, my darling. I am here. I have always been here." "I remember now," Nathaniel said, his voice growing stronger with each word, "not with my mind, but with my heart. The way you held me, the songs you sang, they live inside me still." He struggled to sit up, his young face serious beyond his years. "I said terrible things. I was cruel and proud and wrong about everything that matters." "Hush," Adelaide soothed, gathering him into her arms as she had longed to do for 10 years. "You were a child speaking the words others had taught you. But children can learn new words, better words, truer words." As mother and son held each other in the growing light of dawn, Lord Edmund and Mrs. Ashford watched from the doorway. The sight of Nathaniel's miraculous recovery, not just from fever, but from the sickness of spirit that had made him cruel, broke something loose in their own hearts. "He will always be our son too," Mrs. Ashford said quietly, surprising herself with the admission. "But perhaps he needs more than one mother. Perhaps we all need to learn what love truly means." In the months that followed, Nathaniel divided his time between Greystone Manor and Willowbrook Cottage, learning that true wealth lay not in grand estates, but in the richness of genuine affection. He discovered that his mother's calloused hands held more tenderness than all the silk gloves in England, and that her simple cottage contained treasures no amount of money could buy. And Adelaide, no longer forced to love from a distance, watched her son bloom into a young man who understood that nobility came not from titles, but from treating every soul with dignity and respect. The boy who had once declared he would never want a poor mother became a man who proudly called himself the son of the richest woman in Thornfield, rich in love, rich in compassion, rich in all the things that money could never touch.